May 27, 1942, Washington, D.C. A duty clerk in Naval Intelligence slides a decrypted message into the wrong folder. The paper is 14 lines long, the ink is still damp from the teleprinter, and it contains the exact date, time, and location of Japan's next offensive, an operation that could decide the Pacific War. No one will read it for 6 days. The war is 9 months old. Pearl Harbor burned on December 7, 1941. Wake Island fell on December 23. Hong Kong surrendered on Christmas Day. Manila was declared an open city on January 2, 1942. Singapore, the Gibraltar of the East, capitulated on February 15, 85,000 Allied troops into captivity. Java fell on March 9. Bataan collapsed on April 9. Corregidor would hold until May 6. The Japanese Empire now controls 1.8 million square miles of territory, from the Aleutians to the Indian Ocean, from the Chinese interior to the mid-Pacific atolls, and the momentum is entirely theirs. But there is a crack in the edifice, a hairline fracture invisible to Tokyo. It runs through a basement in Pearl Harbor where a team of codebreakers has been dismantling Japanese naval cipher JN-25B since early March. The team is small, fewer than 30 analysts, led by Commander Joseph Rochefort, a man who sleeps 4 hours a night and wears a smoking jacket because the basement is cold and uniforms restrict thought. They work in a converted storage room beneath the submarine base, no windows, one door, IBM punch card machines clicking in rows. The decrypt rate is still under 40%, but it is enough. On May 4th, intercepts begin arriving in clusters. Radio traffic from Combined Fleet Headquarters in Hiroshima Bay. Vice Admiral Nagumo's carrier divisions, Submarine Squadron 7, logistics units loading ordnance at Saipan and Truk. The pattern is unmistakable. A large operation, multi-axis, imminent. Rochefort's team identifies a recurring code group, AF. It appears in 73 messages over 6 days. AF is the objective. But what is AF? Some in Washington believe it is Oahu, a second strike on Pearl Harbor. Others argue the Aleutians. A few suggest Johnston Atoll. Rochefort is certain it is Midway. But certainty is not proof. And without proof, Admiral Chester Nimitz cannot commit the Pacific Fleet's 3 remaining carriers to a single location. On May 10th, Rochefort proposes a ruse. Midway's garrison will transmit an uncoded message reporting that its desalination plant has failed and fresh water is running low. The message will be sent over commercial undersea cable to Hawaii, then relayed by radio as if originating from Midway. If Japanese listening posts intercept it and relay it to Tokyo, and if Tokyo then communicates the intelligence to its fleet using JN-25B, the codebreakers will see AF and water shortage in the same decrypt. The test runs on May 12th. Midway sends the false distress call. On May 13th, a Japanese intercept is decoded. It reads, AF is short of fresh water. AF is Midway. Rochefort types the confirmation and hands it to his courier at 0340 hours. The courier is Ensign Robert Wyatt, 23 years old, 3rd day on duty officer rotation. Wyatt signs for the message log. He walks upstairs to the communications watch office. He is supposed to deliver the folder directly to the duty intelligence officer, but the DIO is not at his desk. Wyatt places the folder on the desk. He does not mark it urgent. He does not wait. He returns to his post. The folder sits untouched for 19 hours. At 2300 on May 13th, a senior yeoman clearing the desk moves it to a filing cabinet marked Pending Low Priority. The tab reads, Logistical Reports. It is a clerical error. A misread label in poor light. No malice, no conspiracy. Just a man at the end of a 14-hour watch who thought the folder belonged somewhere it did not. Meanwhile, the Japanese timetable accelerates. On May 16th, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto issues Operation Order Number 1. The Midway invasion is set for June 4th. 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu. 2 battleship divisions, 11 cruisers, 47 destroyers, troop transports carrying 5,000 infantry, submarine cordons to intercept any American response, airstrikes to commence at dawn, landing scheduled for June 7th. Yamamoto himself will command from the super battleship Yamato, displacing 72,000 tons. The plan is methodical, overwhelming, and based on the assumption that the U.S. Pacific Fleet remains unaware. In Hawaii, Admiral Nimitz has fragments of the picture. Rochefort's team continues decrypting new intercepts. They identify carrier call signs, refueling schedules, Hong Kong John Lee, air strength estimates, 248 aircraft across 4 decks. But Nimitz needs the full operational order. He needs departure dates, approach vectors, the exact composition of Yamamoto's screening force, and he needs it now. Because assembling a defensive force takes time. Enterprise and Hornet are still returning from the Coral Sea. Yorktown is limping into Pearl with a 10-foot hole in her flight deck from a bomb hit on May 8th. Repair estimates, 3 months in dry dock. Nimitz orders the job done in 3 days. 1,400 shipyard workers swarm the carrier on May 27th. Welders, electricals, hull platers working in shifts around the clock. But even if Yorktown is patched and Enterprise and Hornet refueled, Nimitz is deploying 3 carriers against 4. Inferior air wings, shorter range torpedoes, and if he guesses wrong about the location, he loses the Pacific. He needs that confirmation folder. On May 19th, a junior intelligence officer named Lieutenant Edwin Layton asks Rochefort if the water shortage confirmation was forwarded. Rochefort says yes, 6 days ago. Layton checks the received message log at SyncPack headquarters. The folder is not listed. Layton walks to the communications office. He asks the duty officer. The duty officer checks the inbox. Nothing. Layton asks if any recent intelligence folders were misfiled. The yeoman remembers moving something on the night of May 13th. He checks the logistical reports cabinet. He finds the folder at 16:20 hours on May 19th. Layton opens it. He reads the single-page decrypt. AF is short of fresh water. Confirmation that Midway is the target. Date stamped 6 days earlier. Layton runs, literally runs, up 2 flights to Nimitz's office. Nimitz reads the message in silence. He looks at the date stamp. He looks at Layton. He asks how long the folder was misfiled. Layton tells him 144 hours. Nimitz sets the page down. He does not raise his voice. He picks up the telephone and calls Rochefort. "Joe," he says, "I need everything. Departure windows, screening units, air group rosters, radio silence protocols, anything you have on Yamamoto's command posture. And I need it by midnight." Rochefort says, "You'll have it by 1800. At 1740 on May 19th, Rochefort's team delivers a 22-page intelligence summary. It includes projected departure from Hashirajima, May 27th, carrier divisions approaching from the northwest, troop convoy from the southwest. Expected airstrikes on Midway, June 4th between 0430 and 0600. Radio deception. A diversionary force will strike the Aleutians on June 3rd to pull American attention north. Yamamoto's main body will trail 300 miles behind Nagumo, ready to engage any U.S. surface force. It is the most complete pre-battle intelligence summary in naval history. And it arrives because a misfiled folder was found with 96 hours to spare. Nimitz acts immediately. On May 20th, he recalls Enterprise and Hornet from the South Pacific. On May 22nd, he orders Yorktown into emergency dry dock. On May 26th, he convenes his staff. He tells them the Japanese are coming. He tells them where, when, and with what. He tells them the U.S. will meet them with 3 carriers, 8 cruisers, and 15 destroyers. He tells them to prepare for a battle that will decide whether America holds or loses the Central Pacific. And he tells them that if the enemy learns the U.S. knows, the operation will be canceled and the chance lost. Radio silence is absolute. No acknowledgement signals, no test transmissions. Fleet movements will appear routine. Carriers will depart Pearl under the cover story of exercises northwest of Oahu. The word Midway is not to be spoken on any open channel. On May 28th, Enterprise and Hornet sortie from Pearl Harbor. On May 30th, Yorktown follows. Hull plates still warm from welding torches, some compartments still without lights. Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher commands from Yorktown. Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance commands Enterprise and Hornet. They proceed to a position designated Point Luck, 325 miles northeast of Midway. And they wait. The waiting is worse than action. Pilots sit in ready rooms playing acey-deucey. Engineers monitor fuel levels and boiler pressures. Radio men listen to static, forbidden to transmit. Fletcher and Spruance know the Japanese order of battle down to the last destroyer. They know Nagumo will approach from the northwest. They know the strike will come at dawn on June 4th. But they do not know if Tokyo has discovered the ambush. They do not know if the entire operation is a feint to draw them into a submarine trap. They do not know if Yamamoto's battleships are steaming toward them at this moment, ready to deliver a surface engagement that would end in annihilation. They know only what Rochefort's decrypts have told them, and they trust it because they have no alternative. On the morning of June 3rd, PBY Catalina patrol bombers out of Midway sight the Japanese troop convoy 700 miles west-southwest. The sighting is radioed to Pearl. Nimitz does not react. The transports are the diversion, Nagumo's carriers are the target, and Nagumo is still out of range. Fletcher keeps his task force at Point Luck, engines turning at 12 knots to conserve fuel, combat air patrol cycling overhead in 4 plane divisions, search planes probing to the west and northwest. The tension is a physical thing. Men clean weapons that are already clean, check charts that have been checked, write letters they may never send. They have been at sea for 6 days. They will fight in the morning, or they will wait another day, or the Japanese will not come at all, and the intelligence will prove wrong, and the misfiled folder will have meant nothing. At 05:34 hours on June 4th, a Catalina crew radios, many planes heading Midway, bearing 320. At 05:45, radar on Midway picks up the inbound strike, 108 aircraft at 93 miles. At 05:56, Midway launches every available fighter, 26 obsolete Brewster Buffaloes and F-4F Wildcats. The pilots know they are outmatched. The Zero is faster, more maneuverable, better armed, but they climb anyway. At 06:16, the Japanese strike hits Midway. Bombs shred the fuel depot, the mess hall, the seaplane hangar. Anti-aircraft fire is intense. 3 Japanese planes are shot down. 14 Marine fighters are destroyed in the air, but Midway's air defenses are crippled. The island's commander's radio, Midway urgently needs support. At 06:30, Nagumo's carriers recover the strike wave. Pilots report that a second strike is needed to suppress Midway's defenses before the invasion force can land. Nagumo orders the reserve strike, 93 planes armed with torpedoes for anti-ship attack, to be rearmed with bombs for ground targets. Ordnance crews begin pulling torpedoes from Type 97 attack bombers and wheeling them below. The work is slow, tedious, dangerous. Each Type 91 torpedo weighs 1,841 pounds. Each 800-kilogram bomb must be hauled up from the magazine, fused, and mounted. And in the middle of the rearmament cycle, at 07:28, a scout plane radios, 10 enemy surface units sighted, bearing 010, distance 240 miles. Nagumo halts the rearmament. If American ships are present, he needs torpedoes, not bombs. But the scout does not report carriers, just surface units, cruisers perhaps, destroyers. Nagumo hesitates. His carriers are vulnerable. Half his strike force is on deck being rearmed. The other half is refueling below. He cannot launch a coherent attack for at least an hour, and Midway's defenses are still active. He needs that second strike. At 07:45, he orders the rearmament reversed, back to torpedoes. Bombs are stacked on the hangar decks. Torpedoes are hauled back up. Fueling hoses snake across the deck. Aviation gasoline pools in the scuppers. Ordnance is piled in the open, waiting to be struck below. It is chaos, controlled chaos, but chaos nonetheless. And at 08:20, the scout clarifies, enemy force includes what appears to be a carrier. Nagumo now knows the Americans are here, not in Pearl Harbor, not scattered across the South Pacific, here, within striking range, but his flight decks are jammed with aircraft, half rearmed, half fueled, none ready to launch. He orders his own combat air patrol, 36 Zeros, to maintain station overhead and prepare to intercept American strikes. He orders the rearming accelerated. He orders his screening destroyers to maximum alert for submarines. And he waits, because there is nothing else he can do. At 08:38, the first wave of American torpedo bombers arrives, 15 TBD Devastators from Hornet's torpedo squadron. 8. Slow, obsolete, unescorted. Their fighter cover got lost in the clouds and never found them. The torpedo bombers bore in at 120 knots, 200 feet above the water, weaving through anti-aircraft fire from every ship in the Japanese screen. Zero fighters drop on them like hawks. The Devastator's top speed is 206 miles per hour. The Zero's is 331. The Devastator has 2.30 caliber machine guns. The Zero has two 20mm cannon and two 7.7mm machine guns. It is slaughter. 14 of 15 Devastators are shot down in 6 minutes. Torpedo after torpedo misses or fails to detonate. Not one hit. Only Ensign George Gay survives, floating in the water beneath a seat cushion, watching the battle unfold around him. He will be rescued 30 hours later with burns and shock, but alive. At 0910, 14 more Devastators from Enterprise's Torpedo Squadron 6 attack. They have no fighter cover either. 10 are destroyed within minutes. The remaining 4 launch their torpedoes from 1,000 yards and pull away trailing smoke. No hits. At 0920, 12 Devastators from Yorktown's Torpedo Squadron 3 press their attack. 7 are lost. The squadron commander, Lieutenant Commander Lance Massey, goes down leading the formation. His wingman follows seconds later. A third plane cartwheels into the sea in flames. The survivors turn for home. No hits. 41 torpedo bombers sortie against the Japanese carriers. 35 are shot down. Not a single torpedo hits. It is a disaster, a bloodbath. The courage is beyond question. The result is annihilation. But the torpedo attacks pull Nagumo's fighter cover down to the wave tops. The Zeros are at 500 feet, chasing the last fleeing Devastators, when 37 SBD Dauntless dive bombers from Enterprise appear at 14,000 feet. They have been searching for the Japanese fleet for over an hour. Fuel gauges are edging toward empty. Some pilots are already calculating whether they have enough gas to return to the carrier. And then they see the wakes. 4 carriers in a rough box formation, turning into the wind to launch. Flight decks crowded with armed and fueled aircraft. Crews running to their stations. Zeros climbing back up from sea level, too low and too slow to intercept. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, leading the Enterprise dive bombers, does not hesitate. He rolls into his attack dive at 10:22 hours. 37 Dauntlesses follow. They plunge from 14,000 feet at a 70-degree angle. Airspeed building past 250 knots, the target growing in the bomb sight, anti-aircraft bursts blooming black and orange around them. At 2,500 feet they release. 1,000-pound bombs drop away, arcing down toward the Japanese carriers. At 10:24, 3 bombs hit Akagi. 1 penetrates the flight deck amidships and detonates in the upper hangar among stacked ordnance and fueled aircraft. The explosion triggers a chain reaction. Torpedoes cook off. Aviation fuel ignites. Secondary blasts rip through the ship, blowing out bulkheads and setting fire to everything flammable. Within minutes, Akagi's flight deck is a sea of flame. At 10:25, 4 bombs hit Kaga. The first strikes forward, destroying the bridge and killing most of the command staff. The second and third hit amidships, rupturing fuel lines and igniting the hangar. The fourth detonates on the after-flight deck among parked aircraft waiting to launch. Fuel fires spread instantly. The carrier slows, trailing black smoke visible for 50 miles. At 10:27, 3 bombs hit Soryu. She is the smallest of the 4 carriers, 746 feet long, displacing 18,800 tons. 1 bomb is enough to cripple her. 3 are catastrophic. Fires consume the flight deck within minutes. The order to abandon ship is given at 10:45. She will sink at 1913 that evening, her hull glowing red-hot from internal fires. All 3 carriers are mortally wounded in 5 minutes. The striking power of the Kido Butai, the carrier force that attacked Pearl Harbor, that sank Prince of Wales and Repulse, that ravaged the Indian Ocean and dominated the Pacific for 6 months, is broken. By 10:30, the offensive capability of the Japanese carrier fleet is effectively 0. Akagi will burn until the next morning, then be scuttled by destroyer torpedoes. Kaga will sink at 19:25 on June 4th. Soryu is already sinking. The only surviving carrier is Hiryu, which was operating 10 miles north of the main formation and escaped the dive bomber strike. Hiryu launches 2 counterstrikes. At 1200, 18 Aichi D-3A dive bombers escorted by 6 Zeros find Yorktown. The carrier's combat air patrol shoots down 10 attackers, but 3 bombs hit. 1 penetrates the flight deck and detonates in the smokestack uptakes, smothering the boiler fires. Yorktown slows to 6 knots. Repair crews extinguish the fires and restore partial power within an hour. The carrier is making 19 knots and preparing to recover aircraft when Hiryu's second strike, 10 Nakajima B-5N torpedo bombers, arrives at 1430. 2 torpedoes hit on the port side. The carrier lists 17 degrees. Power fails. The list increases. At 1500, the order to abandon ship is given. Fletcher transfers his flag to the cruiser Astoria and continues to direct the battle. Yorktown does not sink. Salvage crews reboard her the next day and stabilize the list. She is under tow toward Pearl Harbor when Japanese submarine Ma-168 finds her on June 6th and puts 2 more torpedoes into her hull. She will capsize and sink at 0501 on June 7th. At 1700 on June 4th, American dive bombers from Enterprise find Hiryu. 24 Dauntlesses led by Lieutenant Earl Gallagher dive from 19,000 feet. 4 bombs hit. The first strikes forward of the island, wrecking the flight deck. The second and third detonate in the hangar. The fourth hits aft, destroying the aviation workshops. Hiryu burns through the night, explosions rocking her hull every few minutes as ordnance cooks off. At 0230 on June 5th, Captain Tomeo Kaku orders the crew to abandon ship. At 0510, destroyers fire torpedoes into her hull. She sinks at 900, bow first, taking 416 men with her. By June 7th, all 4 Japanese carriers are on the bottom: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu. With them, 248 aircraft and most of their air crews, pilots with 800 hours of flight time, bombardiers who trained for 2 years, mechanics who could strip and rebuild an engine in 4 hours, the institutional knowledge of 6 months of continuous combat operations. Irreplaceable. The U.S. loses Yorktown and destroyer Hammond, sunk by the same submarine that finished Yorktown. 147 aircraft, 307 men. Japan loses approximately 3,057, but the numerical toll is secondary. The strategic shift is absolute. Yamamoto abandons the Midway invasion, withdraws the troop transports, orders the combined fleet back to Japan. The Emperor is not informed of the defeat for 3 days. When he learns, he asks only one question: can we rebuild? The answer is no. Not at the pace required. Japan's industrial capacity can produce 6 fleet carriers per year under optimal conditions. The United States is already producing 1 Essex-class carrier every 8 weeks. Japan begins the war with 10 fleet carriers. After Midway, she has 6. After the battles of 1942 and 1943, she will have 3. By 1944, she will commit her remaining carriers at the Battle of the Philippine Sea and lose 3 more in a single day. By 1945, she will use carriers as decoys because she has no aircraft or pilots to fill them. The battle is decided by many things: by the courage of torpedo bomber crews who pressed attacks they knew were suicidal and drew the Japanese fighters down to sea level; by the skill of dive bomber pilots who found their targets despite navigation errors and fuel starvation and pressed their attacks through anti-aircraft fire that should have destroyed them; by the decision of Nimitz to trust Rochefort's intelligence and commit his outnumbered fleet to a battle he could not afford to lose; by the mechanical failure of the Japanese scout plane that launched 30 minutes late and reported the American carriers 30 minutes later than it should have; by Nagumo's decision to rearm his strike force twice, leaving his flight decks crowded with ordnance and fuel when the American dive bombers arrived; and by the actions of Lieutenant Edwin Layton on May 19th, who asked a question that no one else had asked and found a folder that should never have been lost. Had that folder remained misfiled for another 72 hours, the battle would still have been fought. Enterprise and Hornet would still have sortied. Yorktown might still have been patched and sent to sea. But Nimitz would not have known the full composition of Yamamoto's force. He would not have known that the Aleutian strike was a feint. He would not have known that Nagumo's carriers were approaching from the northwest, and the troop convoy from the southwest. He might have divided his carriers. He might have sent them north to counter the Aleutian operation, leaving Midway undefended. He might have kept them in Pearl, waiting for clearer intelligence, while Japanese forces established an air base 1,300 miles from Oahu and prepared for a second offensive against Hawaii itself. The permutations are endless. The conclusion is not. The folder mattered. In the weeks after the battle, the Navy conducts a quiet investigation into the handling of intelligence materials at Pearl Harbor. Ensign Robert Wyatt is interviewed on June 12th. He states that he placed the folder on the duty intelligence officer's desk as instructed. He did not mark it urgent because the cover sheet bore no such designation. The yeoman who misfiled it is interviewed on June 14th. He explains the lighting was poor, the label unclear, and he was 20 hours into a double shift covering for a man hospitalized with appendicitis. He thought he was placing it in the correct cabinet. No formal reprimand is issued. The report concludes, procedural ambiguity. No negligence established. Recommend standardized priority markings and enhanced lighting in communication spaces. The matter is classified secret and filed. It will not be declassified until 1972. But history does not forget. In August 1942, Commander Joseph Rochefort is awarded the Distinguished Service Medal for exceptionally meritorious service in the period leading up to Midway. The citation does not mention JN-25B or the water shortage ruse or the hundreds of intercepts his team decrypted in May 1942. It speaks in generalities about signal intelligence and contributions to operational planning. In October 1942, Rochefort is reassigned to San Francisco, punishment some say for refusing to share credit with Washington cryptanalysts who contributed less but had better political connections. He will spend the rest of the war in administrative obscurity, running a dry dock in Alameda and training junior officers. In 1985, 4 years after his death, he is posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The citation reads, in part, his analysis directly enabled victory at Midway and turned the tide of the Pacific War. It does not mention the filing cabinet. It does not mention Ensign Wyatt. It does not mention the yeoman whose name remains redacted in the 1942 report. But the folder is preserved, 14 lines on teleprinter paper, stored now in the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. Reference code RG38CNSG Library, Box 112. The paper is brittle. The ink has faded to a pale blue, but the words remain legible under archival lighting. AF is short of fresh water. The Pacific War continues for 3 more years. Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, millions serve, hundreds of thousands die. But the trajectory is set at Midway. Japan will never again operate with 4 or more fleet carriers simultaneously. Her aircrew losses cannot be replaced at pre-war quality. Training programs are shortened from 18 months to 6, then to 3. Pilots arrive at frontline squadrons with 100 hours of flight time, where their predecessors had 800. Her industrial capacity cannot match American shipyards, now launching 1 Essex-class carrier every 8 weeks, 1 light carrier every 6 weeks, dozens of escort carriers, hundreds of destroyers and destroyer escorts, thousands of landing craft. The offensive collapses, the defense begins, and in the end, it is insufficient. There is no monument to the clerk who misfiled the message, no plaque at Pearl Harbor identifying the filing cabinet or the desk or the basement where the folder sat for 6 days. No paragraph in the official histories published by the Naval War College or the Naval Institute Press. Nimitz does not mention it in his after-action report. King does not reference it in his dispatches to Washington. Fletcher and Spruance do not include it in their accounts of the battle. It is a detail, a footnote, an anecdote that survives in oral history interviews conducted decades later when the participants are old men trying to remember what happened in a few hours 40 years prior. But wars are decided in margins, a folder in the wrong drawer, a question asked at the right time, a decision to search when no one else thought to look, the difference between intelligence received and intelligence acted upon, between knowing and believing. between having 3 days to prepare and having 72 hours. May 27, 1942. A duty clerk in Naval Intelligence slides a decrypted message into the wrong folder. The clerk is tired. The label is unclear. The lighting is poor. It is an honest mistake, the kind made 1,000 times a day in 1,000 offices across the Navy. Except this time, the folder contains information that will determine whether the United States holds or loses the Central Pacific. 6 days later, a lieutenant finds it, not because he is looking for it, not because procedure dictates a search, but because he asks a question, a simple question. Did you forward the confirmation? And the answer is no. 96 hours after that, 3 American carriers are waiting in ambush 325 miles northeast of a tiny atoll most Americans had never heard of. They are waiting because a folder was found, because a question was asked, because someone looked in the wrong filing cabinet at the right time, and the war turns on the width of a filing tab.